In for Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all of our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, we have a deal. 3 years into the making, the U.S. and China signed phase 1 of a trade agreement. More on what the deal means for American technology and the U.S.-banned Chinese telecom company Huawei. Plus, climate control. Microsoft makes a major push into removing carbon from the Earth's atmosphere. We'll get details from Microsoft President and Chief Legal Officer Brad Smith. And Case's Crystal Ball will look at what one of the Internet's pioneers sees for tech in the decade to come. Now, after 3 years in the making, the U.S. and China signed phase 1 of their trade deal on Wednesday. President Trump and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He putting pen to paper for a deal that the president claims will have a significant impact on the tech world.
So China has made substantial and enforceable commitments regarding the protection of American ideas, trade secrets, patents, and trademarks. China has also pledged firm action to confront pirated and counterfeit goods, which is a big problem for many of the people in the room.
Those people in the room being the likes of executives from Micron, Qualcomm, and eBay, among others. To discuss its significance and implications, I talked to Adam Siegel, Director of Digital and Cyberspace Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, and in Washington, Bloomberg's Peggy Collins.
What we learned is that the U.S. and China have taken their first step to negotiate some big imports into the U.S. in terms of China promising to commit to buying of more U.S. products, as well as some concessions in terms of enforcement around intellectual property protections and patents, as you mentioned. So essentially, China is saying we are committing to about $200 billion in additional product purchases from the U.S. in exchange for those reduction of tariffs, which we saw announced in December, where the U.S. did not go through with the December tariffs that were threatened, as well as did a reduction of some tariffs that were put on in September. But some of the stickiest issues are still out there and awaiting a phase 2 deal that the administration says they're going to start on soon, but could take a long time to finalize.
Adam, I want to come and show you a chart that I'm showing here inside my terminal, which has been the fundamental issue behind this trade deal, which is U.S. imports from China growing. And then the fact that the tariffs, of course, will remain for the foreseeable future while we keep some progress on China as we head into phase 2. Adam, in your opinion, while there are some still tariffs remaining that are outstanding, did the signing today represent at least some sort of business confidence, some sort of resolution, removing some of the uncertainty that broadly can help businesses move forward?
I think a very little bit of uncertainty. I think U.S. businesses are going to be very skeptical that China is going to follow through on the enforcement on IP protection and the requirements to no longer force technology transfers. I think they're going to be skeptical on how open the Chinese economy is going to become. Because phase 2 is really going to address a lot of the industrial policy issues, the subsidies, the support for state-owned enterprises, really a lot of the tricky knots in this relationship. So I think people are going to be glad that this first phase is done, it's signed, but there are a lot of hard issues that are still waiting for us in the future.
And Peggy, at least for now, are technology companies really happy about the forced tech transfer and some of the IP theft that we were able to agree on?
Well, it's interesting, Taylor, because one of the astounding things about the deal signing today was it was over an hour in terms of the Trump administration and President Trump hailing the agreement. And he called out a lot of CEOs in the room, including those in the tech industry, that he said should be happy about the deal. But there are some issues hanging out there. There's also Huawei, which was not part of the deal, but is still something that is a source of great tension between the two nations and of great consequence for the technology companies out there like Micron and Qualcomm as well.
Well, and Adam, before I get your thoughts on Huawei, talk to me first about your thoughts on that forced tech transfers and some of the issues surrounding IP theft.
I mean, so the Chinese have agreed to not force technology transfer through joint ventures or other informal or formal methods. The problem is the Chinese have always said that they haven't forced technology transfers. It's really just, they say, a state of the market that U.S. and foreign companies have chosen to move manufacturing or form R&D centers or shift or create joint ventures. So, the Chinese in many ways are agreeing to do something that they said that they've never done before. On the IP side, we may see more progress on, because this pushes in the same direction that China itself wants to move. China has been increasing its own ability to enforce IP laws. It wants to be able to protect IP because it has more Chinese firms that produce it. So there may be some more traction in this space, but again, the proof is really going to be in the pudding.
Adam, so then what would you like to see in terms of the execution around those two issues?
Well, I think we're going to have to see some really high-profile cases of China penalizing Chinese firms, state-owned enterprises in particular, that U.S. firms say have stolen or in other illegal forms to get U.S. business or trade secrets. I think we're going to have to see, more cases brought. There has been success in the future where U.S. companies have had success, but more of those cases. And in particular, we're going to have to see firms saying, look, we don't need a joint venture any longer. We don't need to move higher tech manufacturing here. But those are all things that are going to take, I think, a much longer time.
That was Adam Siegel of the Council on Foreign Relations and Bloomberg's Peggy Collins. The signing Wednesday marks the first phase of a broader trade pact. However, the pact avoids dealing with issues over Huawei's access to American markets and suppliers. I got reaction from Don Morrissey, Huawei Director of Congressional Affairs.
It's an interesting and fairly broad agreement. Early opinions are mixed in terms of just how broad beyond the expectations were. But I think it's a good sign in terms of the sovereign states coming to an agreement, at least in this phase one.
What do you want to see from phase two?
Huawei is a global company, but it's also a private employee-held company. So the trade deals between the two companies are not. Two countries are not Huawei. Huawei has no input there. However, like any global company, we look for trade stability as well as open markets, and we've always preached that. And we hope that's the result down the road as we get to phase two or phase three.
So talk to me a little bit more. You mentioned that Huawei is a global company. How has the impact been so far from the trade tensions?
I think like any global company, when you have issues of supply and you have issues that are mixed up into politics, there's always tension. But Huawei always has business continuity plans in place, as many successful companies do. So the effects haven't been that drastic. But like any company, you're always looking for stability and free markets.
Don, it was interesting. We heard from Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin today, and he said very clearly that Huawei is not a chess piece in the U.S.-China trade fight. He wants it to be remaining a very clear national security issue separate from trade. Do you agree that that's how it should be treated?
In either case, I think what the ambition for the company, Huawei's mission.
Microsoft this week made a major investment announcement in the effort to fight climate change. It will invest $1 billion in companies and organizations working on technology to remove or reduce carbon from the Earth's atmosphere. I sat down with Microsoft President and Chief Legal Officer Brad Smith.
Microsoft's commitment today to put $1 billion into climate innovation is a piece of a broader plan. But the fund itself will really be focused on accelerating innovation and climate reduction and removal technology where money is not flowing already. So one area that we just see of being paramount importance is the creation of new and better technology that will enable us all to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Another area where we see a critical need for money where it's not yet flowing is, for example, project finance for renewable energy sites in, say, developing markets. There are some parts of the world, perhaps especially in the United States and in Western Europe, where capital is already flowing for new renewable energy, but not everywhere. And we want our money to make a difference.
So are you really looking outside the U.S. to deploy this $1 billion?
Certainly, in part, we're looking outside the United States. I would say, especially when it comes to the creation of new places that will generate renewable energy. But when it comes to technology innovation, it doesn't know boundaries. It doesn't know specific countries. I'm sure there will be some of this flowing inside the United States, across Europe, and perhaps around the world.
You know, as you take a look at some of Microsoft goals, I know that you have a plan by at least 2030 to be net carbon negative. Where are we on achieving that goal?
Well, I think in many ways, the most ambitious thing we're saying today is, as you just mentioned, we will be carbon negative as a company by 2030, not just for our company, but for our supply chain, for our so-called value chain. And by 2050, we will remove from the environment all of the carbon that Microsoft has emitted, either directly or for electrical consumption, since we were founded in the year 1975. That is a big goal. We have a detailed plan, but we have a lot of work to do. That's why we said this is a decade-long ambition for us.
You're working with a lot of your suppliers and your customers to make sure that they are doing their own initiatives in terms of being net carbon neutral as well. How are you folding in these goals with perhaps some of the contracts that you're making with suppliers and customers to make sure they're being held accountable as well?
It really does require a very detailed plan, which we've been putting together over the past months. One aspect when it comes to supply is naturally the supply of electricity for ourselves. And what we are saying today is that by the year 2025, we will have power purchase agreements in place for 100% renewable energy for all of our data centers, all of our buildings, and all of our campuses worldwide. But then there's all of the other emissions that are generated, for example, as part of our supply chain. And as you said, we will be implementing by next year new tools and processes for our suppliers. We'll want to see consistent measurement of their emissions. We want to help our suppliers with new tools so they can reduce their emissions. We will be talking with our suppliers in the coming months. I think you can expect to see us move forward with new economic incentives so that as we're buying goods and services, we're focused on encouraging our suppliers to reduce their emissions. And if they do, I think they're going to find it easier to sell their products to Microsoft.
That was Microsoft's Brad Smith. Coming up, fintech on fire. Visa agrees to pay $5.3 billion for fintech company Plaid. The price is double Plaid's last valuation. We'll have details. And later, AOL co-founder and current chairman and CEO of Revolution, Steve Case. His tech trends for 2020. This is Bloomberg. This week, we saw a major fintech deal take shape. Visa said it agreed to pay $5.3 billion for Plaid, a fintech company that connects popular apps like Venmo to customer data in the banking system. The price is double Plaid's valuation in a 2018 funding round. I spoke Tuesday to Bloomberg Intelligence's senior analyst for fintech, Julie Shariel, and Bloomberg's Shanali Bosek.
Plaid has 2,600 fintech customers, right? And it has the big ones. It has Venmo, as you mentioned, Acorns, it has Coinbase, right? So it gives Visa these customers to sell into. Plaid also really has been a US-based company. So Visa is in a great position to add fintech customers internationally. with the Plaid services. On top of that, a little bit longer term, Visa sees as an opportunity to sell payment services, payment capability into fintechs. What that will mean is more payment transactions going across the Visa global network.
Sonali, I want to bring you back in here. And earlier we had NEA general partner and a Plaid investor, Rick Yang, talk about traditional financial institutions getting into more of this space. Take a listen.
You have a lot of traditional financial institutions that are starting to think about what is our software strategy? How do we stay relevant? How do we continue growing like a software company? And then you have a lot of software companies that are realizing the benefits of fintech to the consumer, thinking about offering more financial type services. And with infrastructure like Plaid, it becomes much easier to bundle that into software. So if you think about what Visa did and how they talked about their rationale for acquiring Plaid, it was really about growth and it was about expanding the TAM.
Sonali, what do you make of those comments?
It's pretty amazing because if you look at some of the big stories of last year, WeWork, Peloton, and some of the non-traditional technology companies trying to command technology multiples, they had a somewhat hard time, and the software companies are really the ones that won out. People expect a lot of mergers and acquisitions to happen in the software space, and so it seems like we have a pretty perfect marriage here where the software people found the financial industry and the financial industry found a real need for the software people that they have just been burning for. And otherwise, they would have to pay up so much to be hiring these people themselves. And so the partnership's been working quite well. I don't know how many exits we can see that are this big, but remember, there are a lot of really interesting fintech companies out there that have ballooning valuations, including Stripe, which is the most valuable startup in America right now.
That was Bloomberg's Sonali Basak and Julie Shariel. And this week was earnings season for U.S. banks. Many firms cited technology as one of the key drivers of growth and thus have invested heavily into innovation. That investment could be bringing a big change to Wall Street's bonus culture, as traders may have to unlearn some of their most basic assumptions about making money. For more, I spoke to Bloomberg finance reporter Lenon Nguyen on Monday.
What we are unlearning is that bonuses are maybe a thing of the past. In the past, traders were always judged as kind of these, big players in the markets who could make outsized bets and then make outsized profits and money on the back of that. But now, because of automation, because of electronification, traders are starting to make less money because, to be honest, the machines are doing the work for them, and so they just can't garner that type of paycheck anymore.
You know, Lenon, you and I joke about this all the time. Instead of going back to CFA school, we're going to go to coding school. What happens to these traders who don't yet know how to code?
So I think there's a range of things, but what traders are trying to do now, and at least the smart ones, are trying to build in that transition for the future. While they may never be sort of heavy quants or data scientists or PhDs in physics, they need to get up to speed, at least with some of these techniques that are being used on the street, whether it's algorithmic trading or electronic trading. They need to at least understand a little bit of the machinery behind that work in order to stay relevant in the future. It doesn't mean that they're going to write the code necessarily, but they need to have some fluency with that topic.
You know, it's interesting, even though quants and traders of those type are in high demand, it's not necessarily translating into a raise in compensation. Why the discrepancy?
Well, it's interesting now because it seems like these skills are really just table stakes. So a recruiter that I spoke to said that even though quants are in very high demand and even though all the firms really want to make sure that they have a lot of quant talent, that doesn't necessarily mean that the salaries and bonuses have come up in any substantial way. So it almost seems like there's an emphasis on cutting costs, and that means that the basic level of skill you're going to have is going to require a lot more technical skill.
Do you think this is really just the beginning of what looks like a more broader structural change that is undergoing the financial markets at this point?
I do, and a lot of the experts I've spoken to have also said the same, as well as some traders sort of lamenting the good old days of the past. So it does seem like these technical skills are going to stay with us, and the pace of technological innovation and movement within the financial markets is going to continue. And so if people want to stay relevant, they need to learn, they need to upskill, and be able to make that transition into an automated future.
And any other reaction from the street?
A lot of emails from traders saying, "Oh yeah, I wish that I had gotten up to speed, and maybe I should take a class or something." So yes, there have been a lot of kind of
Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Taylor Riggs. The intersection of healthcare and technology was never more apparent than at the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference this past week in San Francisco. It's the place where partnerships are announced and formed and predictions are made. One of the biggest hospital systems, Providence St. Joseph, announced a partnership with Microsoft in July. Its CEO, Rod Hochman, shared with me Monday his 10 predictions for healthcare in 2020.
We're seeing this big revolution in the digital front end of healthcare, where all folks really want to do is they want to be able to figure out who their doctor is, what's wrong with them, and do it in a couple of clicks.
Who have been some of the biggest disruptors, and do those disruptors continue in 2020?
Oh, there's a whole list of them. I think everyone wants to do healthcare. We're seeing, the Walmarts of the world are in healthcare. Amazon is in healthcare. Plus, there are a lot of startups that are kind of looking at particularly the ambulatory space to see what they can be doing in healthcare. So I don't even worry about my traditional competitors anymore. I really think about all of the electronic startups that are around us. And what we've figured out is that we've got to be able to partner with those and create that digital front end that it makes it easy for our 13 million customers to get in touch with us.
So do you view Amazon's early entry into this race as a threat or a very good motivator?
That's a good one. I think both. I think both's the answer. And there are going to be certain things we're going to do with folks like Amazon. I think what we saw in our Microsoft arrangement was that they really wanted to help us make healthcare better and not necessarily compete with us in our core business. And so that, for us, really made a lot of sense. And this comprehensive relationship that we have looking at what the healthcare hospital or healthcare spot of the future looks like is something that we're both working on together.
You know, Rod, the big thing when you talk about healthcare and technology is data privacy and holding on to that sensitive information. Are health systems prepared to work with big tech on data privacy? And then I guess I wonder if big tech as well is doing enough to protect healthcare data.
You've said it perfectly. I think we're very worried. The one thing that our patients trust us is with their data. And they don't want to see us giving away their data to someone else and it's being out there being utilized for a whole. So we've been very protective about that relationship. So we're really looking for tech partners that are going to understand that. And we think that the difference is that the consumer really has to be in control of their data and they have to be a partner in this. So it's not like I'm going to just give up my data and hope that something happens. I think the consumer wants to be a partner in this data transfer and understand what protections they have in giving that information over.
That was Rod Hochman, CEO of Providence St. Joseph Health. Small cap companies like LabCorp and TellaDoc also play an important role in healthcare tech. The topic was part of the conversation I had with Lisa Gill, head of healthcare technology and distribution at JP Morgan. She has been a leading member of the healthcare equity research team at JP Morgan for 16 years.
LabCorp, really on the lab side, the integration there is more between medical and diagnostics. So they have a CRO, which was Covance, marrying that together with a lab company and have done really well in being able to do patient recruitment, bringing new technology from a medical perspective to the marketplace. TellaDoc is really, truly one of our favorite names and has been for a long time on the telehealth side. And as you think about marrying together consumer, where do you want the services, at the cost of the services, and what they made an acquisition or announced an acquisition yesterday of a company called InTouch. And so now this creates a broader platform for them to be able to touch people in the hospital, at home. They have a great relationship with CVS, so in the stores at CVS, and that opportunity to bring a physician.
As you take a look at companies that are making heavy investments within AI, how is that poised to also be a disruptor within healthcare?
Yeah, so I think as you think about artificial intelligence, I think that there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that when you start thinking about making decisions around healthcare where artificial intelligence can really play a part. I think when you look at things like value-based care, which is the direction that this country needs to move in, we need to move away from fee-for-service towards value-based care, and where that artificial intelligence comes in and looks at patient populations, looks at, okay, if you're a diabetic, what's going to happen to you next? What are the things that we need to do to keep you healthy? And not just from a physical perspective, but how about a mental perspective? And that's where companies like TellaDoc come into play, where they have programs with BetterHelp, where you can get that help with that individual to talk to that psychologist to walk through not just your physical ailments, but your mental ailments.
Were the threats of Amazon entering this space overblown?
You know, this is going to sound very strange to you right now, but I think Amazon coming into any space is actually really good for those companies. And the reason that I believe that is that companies in turn make big investments to try to compete against this, and it makes them better and smarter. And so when you think about a platform like Amazon, who really tailors to the consumer, it's made a lot of B2B companies rethink about how they're going to have that interaction in the marketplace, what technology they need to put in place in order to compete.
And do you feel like that's made companies better off now than they were 4 years ago? They've been having to
100%.
Forced to integrate.
Yes, forced to integrate. You've had a lot of consolidation in healthcare services. You've seen CVS come together with Aetna. You've seen Cigna come together with Express Scripts. You've got United Healthcare that has a massive platform from a healthcare services perspective. And I think a lot of that is because of competition in the marketplace. How do you drive down costs? How do you drive efficiencies? And companies like Amazon, the threat of an Amazon, I really think creates the opportunity for these companies to think about things differently.
That was my conversation with Lisa Gill, JP Morgan Chase Managing Director and Senior Analyst. Coming up, Jeff Bezos said, quote, the 21st century is going to be the Indian century, but will the country welcome Amazon and other U.S. big tech firms? We'll have more next. And also still ahead, AI, wellness and healthcare, and big tech backlash. We'll talk about it all with AOL co-founder and chairman and CEO of Revolution, Steve Case. This is Bloomberg. U.S. big tech companies are trying to push into India, but not everyone is welcome in the country. On his trip to New Delhi this week for an Amazon India gathering, Jeff Bezos faced large protests across the country. Meanwhile, India's attitude toward Apple and Samsung appears to be rather positive. To discuss how India is reacting to an influx of foreign tech firms, I spoke to Vivek Wadhwa, a distinguished fellow at Harvard Law School.
If you look at what Amazon does, it eats entire industries. I mean, look at the monopoly they built in the United States. India is really worried about that. So I think what they're doing in trying to restrict Amazon is actually sensible. I know this won't make me very popular here, but I actually agree with some of the Indian policies trying to hold Amazon back because we haven't done that here. And look at the damages. It's building a monopoly over here. That's what they're trying to prevent in India.
What are some of those policies that you're talking about what Prime Minister Narendra Modi has done to help moderate or control some of the influx?
Well, in this case with Amazon, Jeff Bezos, the reason why he's getting such a negative reaction is because there are laws, antitrust laws, which say that if you have an open platform, you can't be selling against the merchants on the platform, which is exactly what Amazon does here. Every time something is successful, suddenly it shows up in Amazon Basics, and the merchants who are producing the other competitive products go out of business. So what India is trying to prevent is from this type of monopolistic behavior. That's why there's such a negative reaction to it. Now, on the other hand, with Apple and Samsung, Modi has been rolling out the red carpet for Apple and Samsung to come and manufacture their phones there. India realizes that China has become a big problem for American companies, that there's a lot of pressure on them to move manufacturing out of China. So they're saying, well, come over here. We'll give you all the facilities you want. We have a very large market for you, and we'll welcome you.
Okay, I want to take all of these companies piece by piece. Let's start with Amazon. How do you then make inroads there, given you show up and you agree with protests?
Well, first of all, you don't break laws like what they're doing. This antitrust investigation, Amazon has been playing games. That they have third-party companies, so if they can't sell, their own Amazon Basics products over there, they simply buy a company, put it under the guise of a different company, and then promote the heck out of it. So these are anti-competitive behaviors that Amazon does in the United States. It's also doing in India. It shouldn't do that. It really should. If it's going to be a neutral marketplace, it's a neutral marketplace. So it needs to obey the laws and do what's right, not only in India, but also in the West. Europe is also, imposing restrictions on Amazon. So Amazon is out of line over there, and this is why they're protests. That these people don't want to go out of business. They don't want to be dependent on Amazon for their livelihoods, because what they're worried about is that Amazon will start undercutting them and put hundreds of thousands of people out of business. That's what the worry is, rightfully so, by the way.
Okay, so it's not just Amazon, but Microsoft, their CEO, has been critical of India as well. And you were, talking about how he's sort of been isolating himself from working with India by making comments on some of their religious-based citizenship laws. How do you, again, work with India, but then also not have to be able to comment on some of the things that perhaps you don't agree with?
Well, Microsoft is actually very well respected there. Satya Nadella is a legend over there. I think he made a mistake by commenting on this new immigration policy they have, which says that we welcome minorities from neighboring countries, except if they're Muslims. That's a very contentious issue. And Satya made some comments about it, which were actually inaccurate, and he got into a lot of trouble for it, and I'm sure he regrets it. But there's been no other issue with Microsoft being open over there. As far as being critical, well, what about in the United States? We have Muslim bans here as well. We're talking, Texas is refusing to accept refugees, bracket Syrian Muslims. I mean, we discriminate against African Americans. Why don't we clean up our own house first? That's what the arguments are about Satya Nadella, commenting like this. And yes, Microsoft, there are problems here, but there are also problems in America. Comment on America before you start criticizing us. And that is fair criticism also. Satya, like I said, is very widely respected there, and Microsoft has done wonders in India.
Well, it's not all bad news, because you smartly pointed out at the beginning of the conversation that Apple and Samsung have sort of had a different experience over there. They have been perhaps more welcomed, looked at perhaps receiving some subsidies from India to help them gain some inroads. What then is the difference in tactics, if you will, between companies that are being received well, companies that are not?
Well, in the case of Microsoft, I think there was just a glitch over here. The company is doing very well and it's very well respected. Satya Nadella is a legend in India because of what he's achieved. So there's no issue over there. Amazon, yes, there's a big problem here. And again, the problem here is Amazon itself. I don't think it's a country that's the problem. It's Amazon's monopolistic ways, which we tolerate in the United States, and we shouldn't tolerate over there.
But what about
Facebook
Apple
and WhatsApp
and
Samsung?
Yeah, what about
Apple and Samsung? They're welcome over there. Right. I mean, they're doing very well, and they're being encouraged to move manufacturing. And Indians haven't been buying the high-end Apple phones because they're so expensive. The Samsung phones are better, but that's just normal, competitive business. There isn't really an issue with those companies.
That was Harvard Law School's Vivek Wadhwa. Zen Meat has been dubbed the Chinese version of Impossible Foods and launched its plant-based meat products on the market last year. Co-founder Vincent Liu spoke to Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie on the sidelines of the UBS Greater China Conference in Shanghai on how competition for this market is shaking out in China.
The government definitely wants more plant protein intake for the consumers and Chinese consumers. But also unfortunately, we have the swine fever last year, so it doubled the effect of the plant-based food sector. So a lot of food company is noticing this new area, and like our competitor in the U.S., like Beyond Meats and Impossible Foods, they have done very successful marketing and product development in the U.S. market. So people is expecting, if there's company or if there's market for, mainland China.
Do you have an estimate for the value of the market in China over the next 5 to 10 years? Is there a dollar number that you have that you're putting to your investors?
It's very hard to tell right now, but what we have is a very solid prediction, because in China, the plant-based milk or plant-based drinks, substitute around 15% of the dairy market, right? So it's reasonable to see plant-based meat can substitute like around 10% or up to 15% of the pork or the meat market in China.
Now, you talked about Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat. They're knocking at the door of the Chinese market. They do face some regulatory hurdles, though. How do you ensure that you can be in a position in the Chinese market to fend off that kind of competition?
Yeah, I don't see that as a competition right now because we're too small. We're just small and starting up company. I'm really excited if they will go to mainland China because that's gonna open the market. It's gonna educate people. The reason and the main goal is the same. We want to let people eat more plant-based protein, more plant-based food other than animal protein or animal-based food, right? So we have the same vision and the same result we want to achieve. So it's gonna be better if they enter Chinese market as soon as possible.
As soon as possible. You welcome the entrance of Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat into the market.
Finally, this hour, there seems to be no shortage of tech-related news that is shaping the industry. Among the big themes, customer data and privacy, antitrust, as well as U.S. trade. With more on what to expect this year, I was joined Tuesday by Steve Case, AOL co-founder and current chairman and CEO of Revolution. He has been traveling the U.S. in seek of startups and innovation hubs outside Silicon Valley.
Well, this is our 9th road trip we've done. So far, we visited 43 cities all around the country to shine a spotlight on these rising cities that are becoming stronger startup cities and some of the entrepreneurs there that are building really interesting companies that are trying to break out. Obviously, Silicon Valley is terrific and will continue to be a great center of innovation. But right now, it's crazy that essentially all the venture capital goes to entrepreneurs there and other places like New York and Boston. Last year, 75% of venture capital went to just 3 states. And a lot of their states, whether it be Kansas or Oklahoma or Ohio or Michigan or other states, all get less than 1%. So we're trying to level the playing field, get more venture capital to more entrepreneurs so they can create more jobs in more parts of the community. We can have more of a inclusive innovation economy where everybody feels like they have a stake in the future and can be part of the future as opposed to just a few entrepreneurs in a few places. It's exciting to see what's happening in these cities. There have been a number of breakout successes with our Rise of the Rest, the seed fund. We've now backed over 100 companies in over 70 cities, over 30 states, and we're really just getting started. It's exciting to see what's happening out in the rest of the country, not just on the coast.
Well, it wouldn't be a good interview with an entrepreneur if we didn't get some of your top 10 predictions for the next decade as we sort of wrap up the last decade. Reading through your blog, one thing that really stuck out to me was the rise of health and wellness within the startups. I wonder, though, as this increasingly becomes a bigger and bigger theme, how much of this appears to be overvalued, given there has been so much attention already on health, on wearables?
Well, I think you ain't seen nothing yet. Healthcare is 1/6 of the economy, one of the most fundamental aspects, obviously, of our everyday lives, and it's really ripe for disruption. A lot of the focus in the last 5 or 10 years has been on the wellness side of things like wearables, Fitbit, and others, because that's a consumer decides, a consumer pays decision. It's a lot easier to go to market. The real focus in the next 10 years is the core of the healthcare system, what really is a sick care system, and there are a lot of companies doing really interesting things. Ones we backed through Revolution in Chicago, a company called Tempus is using big data, machine learning, AI to diagnose cancer much more effectively, much more precisely, so people know exactly what they're dealing with, and there can be much more of a personalized approach to the diagnosis and the treatment. So you can see a lot more of that, the convergence of technology to really provide better health care more conveniently with better outcomes and at lower cost.
Another one of your big predictions was more tech backlash. I think the problem here is there isn't enough trust really between the consumers and then the owners of that data as well. How do you get more trust so that there isn't that big backlash that we've really started to see in the last few years?
Yeah, I think there's 2 areas to look at. One is sort of the consumer side of things. Consumers still love their technology, the iPhones or Netflix or many other things, but they're starting to get a little bit concerned in terms of what these companies are doing with their data and other kinds of things. They're a little concerned about even the elections because of some of the things happening around Facebook. So they're getting a little more anxious that maybe what they thought was all positive, maybe there's some negative. And as a result, not surprisingly, the policymakers, whether it be here in D.C. and Congress e-commerce or other places are saying, this technology does enable a lot of great things to happen, but how do we strike the right balance in terms of managing this? And I think you'll see in the short run, because of this backlash, in terms of including a regulatory backlash, probably a look on the antitrust side, should some of these big companies, Facebook or Google or others, get broken up. That may or may not happen, but at minimum, I think these companies will be a little more careful about making any new big acquisitions, and that will have an interesting impact in the startup sector. Will open up opportunity, maybe more competition in some of those sectors that right now look pretty locked down by the incumbents.
You also are looking at a continued rise of e-commerce. Does someone come in and disrupt Amazon?
Amazon's pretty well positioned, although Walmart and Amazon are really duking it out. And obviously, they have different strategies, but they're starting to converge. One was physical, the other was digital. Now both are doing more of a bricks and clicks kind of strategy. But that's not the only place to focus. Most of the attention is on what's happening on the direct-to-consumer side of things. There are many companies that have formed, Warby Parker and Framebridge and others also in the last few years, capitalizing on this e-commerce boom. But there's also a lot of great companies that are doing things more on the back end. The consumer doesn't necessarily see it, but companies like BigCommerce or Optoro that focuses on reverse logistics, what's happened when products get returned, or FreightWaves, a company we backed in Chattanooga that's figuring out where trucks should go to deliver the products. So the e-commerce revolution is not just what's happening when you order a product and somebody delivers it to you. It's all the infrastructure that's happening around that, and that will continue to accelerate in the next decade.
Steve, we have just less than a minute, and I really wanted to get your thoughts, given we just surpassed the 20-year anniversary of the AOL-Time Warner merger. Looking back, if you had the chance to redo it, would you?